Good evening, everyone. My name is David Elwood. I'm the dean here at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I want to welcome you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. Tonight, we're going to have what is surely going to be a lively and interesting conversation with Congressman Barney Frank. His title is one of the best titles I've seen in quite a long time. The Emperor Has Too Many Clothes, the Deficit, the Pentagon, and the Quality of Life in America. I do want to thank all the IOP and all the students and others that have made this possible this evening. It's absolutely timely, and thanks to all your work. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the podium over to Jeff Solnit to introduce our guest. But I do want to mention one thing just in passing, which is the rules of the road around here. As I think all of you know, the Kennedy School and the Harvard is very fortunate to have extraordinary people come and speak, for which we are incredibly grateful. And the rules of their speaking are only two. First is anyone who speaks here must absolutely answer questions from the audience. And Congressman Frank is quite willing and quite good at answering questions no matter what they are from the audience. In exchange, we expect that the speaker will be given an unfettered chance to complete his or her talk without interruption. And if someone chooses to violate those rules, they will be asked to leave. You have plenty of opportunity to ask questions at the end. So I'm very much looking forward to this evening, but let me now introduce Jeff Solnit, who is the president of the Institute of Politics Student Advisory Committee, and he'll be introducing Mr. Frank. He's a member of the Harvard College class of 2012. He's got spectacular talents. He's a government major as well as a secondary field in computer science. He's actually in Mather House and hails from Boca Raton, Florida, the kind of weather we have here today. But more importantly, he is spectacular and successful and available for hire. And so if you think he does a good job on this introduction, I would urge you to think about what remarkable things he could do for you. So thanks very much, Jeff Solnit.
It is with great honor that I can warmly welcome Representative Frank both back to Harvard and back to the IOP family this evening. While many know that Representative Frank spent nearly a decade here at Harvard, both as an undergraduate and graduate student, people often forget his role as student assistant to the first director of the Institute of Politics, Richard Neustadt. For those that don't know, the Institute was designed as a living memorial to President Kennedy, built on the idea that some moment, experience, or interaction sparked a young John F. Kennedy to enter political life. Mr. Neustadt, commenting on the founding of the Institute, said, "We started trying to excite people about elected politics at a time when there was already such excitement in the air." Congressman Frank's first days were no different. At the height of the Vietnam War, President Johnson's Defense Secretary Robert McNamara was not particularly popular on Harvard's campus. However, Representative Frank and Richard Neustadt were determined to give students the opportunity to engage with Secretary McNamara, and they certainly took the opportunity up. Secretary McNamara was the first of the IOP's fellows, then called associates. At that time, the JFK Forum didn't exist, and there wasn't much precedence for how to expose students to someone like Secretary McNamara. In planning for his visit, Representative Frank helped establish many of the traditions that we continue here today, such as having off-the-record discussions with guests and randomly selecting interested students to join at various events. The future congressman held a public lottery where he selected, by pointing blindfolded at a large page, 120 students to attend a small discussion with the secretary. He even nimbly negotiated with progressive anti-war activists, Students for a Democratic Society, all in an effort to create a safe, peaceful space for his peers to engage in real discussion with the secretary. However, despite Representative Frank's best efforts, protesters crowded around Secretary McNamara's car, forcing him to stand on top and make further remarks. As the situation grew more heated, Congressman Frank led Secretary McNamara through the steam tunnels under Harvard's campus to safety. This early moment in the history of the Institute of Politics set the stage for our future. Congressman Frank's work has helped the IOP provide 45 years of political dialogue on this campus, engaging world leaders and politicians with some of the brightest minds in the country. But more importantly, Congressman Frank used the same skills practiced here at Harvard to build a long list of legislative accomplishments. Like his fellow Harvard students in the 1960s, Congressman Frank continues to speak frankly about his convictions and use facts to challenge his peers in the House of Representatives. Whether advocating for consumer rights or civil rights for his constituents in Massachusetts or for the country at large, there is no doubt that Representative Frank has learned much from his time, both as a student and a teacher here at Harvard. Congressman Frank's peers wrote the following profile in the Harvard 1966 yearbook. With a New Jersey accent, the burly, bespectacled Barney Frank displays an immense knowledge of government, from the arid heights of political theory on down to the personal eccentricities of the Massachusetts state legislature. He is a phenomena, a living demonstration that an education can be vital, vibrant, and fun, and notes that his integrity, irreverence, and energy command the respect of his students. I have no doubt, like that as undergraduate students nearly 44 years ago, we are to be captivated by not just the words, but also the example of Representative Frank this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. For historical purposes, where we emerged from the steam tunnels, it's right across the street in the gulch there between Kirkland and Elliott houses. That was out of that door that we took Robert McNamara. And it having been mentioned, I just really want to tell you that whatever you think of his policies, et cetera, and he, of course, expressed later very poignant regrets, he was an extraordinarily decent human being because my careful planning, he was at the time, remember, Secretary of Defense. It was just before the congressional elections of 1966. And I managed to thrust him into the midst of an extremely embarrassing situation which became international news. Even it was on North Vietnamese radio. So he just was very gracious about it. So I've always appreciated that. What I am going to talk about today is the military budget. And to explain my title, I have for some time been frustrated because I believe we heavily overspend on the U.S. military to the detriment of our economy in many ways. And I have been frustrated by my inability to get people to understand that. The frustration grew until recently because I think we're now getting some attention. But I would hear people debate the deficit, and they would talk, Greg Mankiw, major advisor to President Romney, to candidate Romney, as he was to President Bush, recently wrote in the New York Times on Sunday that we have to either raise taxes or cut Social Security and Medicare. And I get frustrated that this, I think, grossly overinflated military budget is left out. And it struck me, I said, I feel like the kid who said the emperor has no clothes because nobody else noticed. But it occurred to me that the problem is not that the emperor has no clothes, but that this emperor is wearing 4 sweaters, 3 suits, 6 hats, a lot of boots, and gives away clothes to everybody in the world. My purpose is to say it's the military budget, stupid, to go back to that Clinton era with the economy. My fundamental point is that we spend, by the way, we'll be spending in this fiscal year more than $650 billion on the U.S. military, much more than Medicare, for example. The military budget is, if you leave out the entitlements, you talk about the discretionary budget, the Departments of Health and Human Services and Education and Transportation, Justice, et cetera, and state, the military budget is more than half of that total. More than half of it is, the military is 54%, the other is 46%. The amount is just staggering. And in fact, we have 2 military budgets. We have the base budget, it's called, which is about $535 billion, which is the Pentagon. And then whenever we go to war, the Pentagon, to try to keep the number looking smaller, and the presidents, they're not autonomous, come up with a separate budget for the war. In fact, the way it works, for those of you who are familiar with the legal profession, it would appear that we have the military on retainer. That is, we pay them a certain amount every year, or we pay the budget every year, but if they go to war, they bill us. And so the total is $650 billion. $120 billion right now is for the war in Afghanistan. It would be maybe a little bit more. We'll save a little bit when we pull out of Iraq. The point is that amount far exceeds any rational assessment of our national security. And if you read it, part of the problem is, and I had a high-ranking Pentagon guy, can't quote him, told a friend, tell Frank he's right. The problem with the military, with us is, whenever we spend money to do something, and when there's no longer a need, we keep spending. See, we never get out of anywhere. In 1949, Harry Truman did a great thing. Western and Central Europe was consisted of countries that were poor and weak, and they were threatened by a very aggressive communism and a brutal one under Stalin. Now, they were poor and weak because of World War II. Russia was also poor, but it wasn't weak because Stalin could use that enormously repressive mechanism to put whatever nickel he did have into the military. And there was this serious threat of an advancing communism. England, Prime Minister Attlee called Truman in 1947 and said, hey, look, I've been trying to keep the communists out of Greece. I can't handle it anymore. England doesn't have the money. You better come in. So that led to the establishment of NATO in 1949. That was a great thing, and here were the elements of NATO. Poor and weak Western and Central Europe, aggressive and threatening and heavily armed communism, and to keep them apart, billions and billions of American military dollars and manpower. Now, 3 of those elements were there in 1949. 2 of them have disappeared. Western and Central Europe, the countries are no longer poor and weak. There is no more Stalin, there's no more communism, there's no more Soviet Union. What hasn't changed is that we are still protecting the now wealthy nations of Western Europe against a non-existent threat. And I understand there's still Russia. Russia is not comparable in its power to the Soviet Union, and I am no great fan of Russia. I am still grateful that my grandparents got the hell out of there. But we are still armed. We have NATO. By the way, NATO was 61 years ago. Very few constructs of that sort really have a life of 61 years of a useful life. If you go back in time, by the way, before NATO, for the same amount of time since NATO, you are in the first presidency of Grover Cleveland. 2 things have survived. Nothing has survived from the Cleveland administration. NATO survived 61 years. It's not just Western Europe. Right after World War II, we put Marines on Okinawa. They were there in part to reassure the rest of Asia that the Japanese would be not attacked again. We still have Marines on Okinawa. They have no military function. Yes, we have a problem with China. There is air and sea power. But 10,000 Marines in Okinawa have no role. We're not going to send 10,000 Marines to fight the Chinese millions. They are there because they're there. I'll tell you why they're there. And I think the best thing to do is to quote people. This is from the New York Times about a week ago. Defense officials say it would be catastrophic, further cuts in the military. It would force troop reductions in the Pacific. Now, we have well over 100,000 people. We have the 7th Fleet. We have troops in South Korea. They argue that even a small drawdown of, say, 5,000 troops would be seen in the region as a symbolic retreat as China expands its military capabilities. Now, it's true, China is expanding. In every year, we, of course, spend far more than the Chinese spend in that year. And the Chinese, yes, they are expanding. In fact, they just are about to launch their first aircraft carrier. The first Chinese aircraft carrier is a retrofitted ship that they bought from Ukraine. I'm sure that looks pretty impressive to the Vietnamese. I'm not afraid of it, to be honest, and I'm not playing tough guy. So we have the troops in Japan. We have a nuclear arsenal. We were ready to fight a thermonuclear war against the Soviet Union. And we had the triad. The triad is 3 ways of dropping thermonuclear weapons on the Soviet Union: Strategic Air Command, nuclear submarines, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Not coincidentally, and this is part of our problem, that's one for each service. The Army has the missiles, and the Navy has the submarines, and the Air Force has the airplanes, of course. There is no more Soviet Union to fight. I have a serious suggestion. People think I'm kidding. I want to say to the Pentagon, you know those 3 ways we have to win a thermonuclear war against the Soviet Union? Pick 2. Give up 1. You pick the one. It would probably be missiles. The others have dual use. We'd save billions of dollars. The point is that there is this view that we have to be everywhere. And as I said, I think it is very clear we are overcommitted militarily. Go back to Western Europe. The average percentage of gross domestic product spent by the Europeans on the military is 1.7%. We're more than 3 times that. Why should the U.S. be spending money to keep troops in Germany when the Germans don't feel all that worried about it? Further examples, the Air Force. Strongest Air Force in the world, fortunately, is the U.S. Air Force. I want us to be the strongest nation in the world. You know what the second strongest Air Force in the world is? It's the U.S. Navy. Now, I don't want to tempt fate, but if the Air Force was the strongest Air Force in the world and the Navy was tied for third, I would feel very secure. I don't think we have to have first and second place all to ourselves. And it is based on, I'm trying to find the particular quote, where they say, President Obama, this is from November 3rd of this year, quoting the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, President Obama's national security strategy calls on U.S. forces to be able to strike virtually any target on the planet. That's very expensive. And it is, you cannot tell me that our national security depends on it being able to shoot anybody, anywhere, anytime. And we take it on now. In fact, when you ask people, the defenders of this, they go beyond national security. Here's William Crystal. I guess Bill's around here these days. In his article, National Interest in Global Responsibility, and here is the explanation why we need to do this. And it's based, frankly, on the notion that simply, here we go. At the beginning of this century, Theodore Roosevelt worried, this is his rationale that he says is good, Theodore Roosevelt had it right. Theodore Roosevelt worried that Americans had become so isolated from the struggles of the rest of the world and so immersed in our material prosperity, think of that, we're worried about having a decent living here at home, that they were becoming effete. Roosevelt implored Americans to look beyond the immediate needs of their daily lives and embrace as a nation a higher purpose in the world. He aspired to greatness for America, and he believed the nation could only be great if it accepted its responsibilities to advance civilization and improve the world's condition. This is, in many cases, and people will be explicit about this, I'm on the Republican side, it is American exceptionalism that God created America. I didn't make this up. God created America to be the leader in the world and to be the enforcer of order in the world. Having heard that a couple of times, I decided that I am entitled to a refund on my Bible. Because I do not remember in the version of Genesis I bought that God created NATO. I mean, he created night and day and water and earth. I mean, but they explicitly, in fact, demean the notion that our purpose should be to improve ourselves. So here's where here's again Mr. Crystal. American preeminence cannot be maintained from a distance by some post-Cold War version of the Nixon doctrine where we hang back and keep our powders dry. We would instead conceive ourselves, this is if we did what they think is necessary, and which they're trying to get the budget to do, and which the budget under George Bush became that. The United States would conceive of itself as at once a European power, an Asian power, a Middle Eastern power, and of course a Western Hemisphere power. It would act as if threats to the interests of our allies are threats to us, which they are. It would act as if instability in important regions of the world, by the way, when people in this geopolitical thing start talking about important regions of the world, you will not be surprised to know that there are no unimportant regions of the world. Every region of the world is either important in itself or it's important because it is next to an important region of the world. So that's why we have to hit every target everywhere. And again, I'm not making this up. This is what they say. It would act as if that's, and the flouting, it would act as if instability in important regions of the world and the flouting of civilized rules of conduct in those regions are threats that affect us with almost the same immediacy as if they were occurring on our doorstep. Otherwise, we would be an unreliable partner in world affairs, which would erode American preeminence and the international order. It is this notion again that we need to take it on ourselves to do all these things. And the last one from Jeff Jacoby, who's the leading conservative writer of the Boston Globe, quoting John Adams, who didn't understand that we had to run the world. And he said, in Adams' day, America was not the mightiest, wealthiest, and most influential nation on the face of the earth. Today it is. The United States is the world's only superpower, and if we shirk the role of global policeman, no one else will fill it. Right, because they're too smart to try to be the global superpower. With great power comes great responsibilities. One of these is destroy monsters, take down tyrants, and flout the rules of civilization. If neighborhoods and cities need policing, it stands to reason the world does too. Totally false analogy. Your neighborhood or city is police, but they vote for the police, they pay for that police. Now, I would be morally conflicted if I thought we could do it. That is, here I am saying, let's not try. But in fact, the notion that heavily armed, very brave young Americans can put down instability, can bring civility to foreign cultures. We just had this argument with some of the administration who want us to stay in Iraq. Why? Because the Kurds don't get along with the Arabs and the Shia don't get along with the Sunni. And that is obviously true, and I regret that. But I don't think sending the American military is going to stop that. I mean, the fact is that these efforts, here's the deal. The American military is a superb force, and they can stop bad things from happening. The problem is these people think you can use the military to make good things happen. And you can't, and it does more harm than good. So I have been arguing that. Now, that gets greater force today because if we do not reduce the military, we're going to cut entitlements, i.e. Social Security and Medicare. Or we're going to raise taxes. I just quoted Mr. Mankiw, who says, well, the choice is raising taxes or cutting the military, cutting the entitlements. There's a great quote, I can't find it, from Buck McKeon, who is the Republican chair of the Committee on Armed Services in the House. And he said that coming after the Pentagon because they want to protect the sacred cows of entitlement spending. I would tell you that I think that the enactment in the United States in the 20th century of Social Security and Medicare were two great social accomplishments. Prior to that, the notion of a middle-class existence when you got old was a rarity. If you weren't rich and you lived long enough, you got poor. And with the combination of those two, we created the norm of a middle-class existence, not a luxurious one. I don't understand why I would apologize for that. By the way, in Italy, they're now talking about changing the retirement age from 60 to bring it up to 60. It is, of course, in America, 65. Now, how can the Italians do it? They got some problems now, but why have they been able to afford that retirement age? Because they don't have to have any military budget. We have subsidized this. It is now either or. It's a zero-sum game. I don't want to make cuts immediately, and I think we should be putting some money into the economy. But yes, we do have to adopt a long-range deficit reduction plan. If you do not cut the military substantially, and by the way, we're at 650. I'm talking about ending the war in Afghanistan and cutting another 100. It would leave us at $450 billion, still more than the next 5 nations in the world put together. And of course, about 3 of those 5 nations are our allies. So our margin of superiority at $450 billion would still be enormous. It would bring us back more to where we were under the Clinton administration. We face a choice. If we exempt the military from budget cutting, then Social Security and Medicare get hit very badly. So what are the arguments against reducing the military? Well, one, of course, is this argument that we have to fulfill the great purpose. They do make an effort to say, oh, if you reduce the military, we will be weak. That's based on cultural lag. Before 1940, America didn't have much of a military because we didn't need one. I mean, the only people who Americans shot in any great number after the Revolution, sadly, were each other in the Civil War. We had big oceans, and there was no way to get at us. Then came the Nazis, and for 50 years, first under Hitler and then under the communists, it is true, there were evil forces in the world that threatened our existence as a free nation and had the capacity to damage us. And that was I think it was overstated towards the end of the Cold War, but at any rate, that collapsed in 1990. Since 1991, there has been no existential threat to America's existence, and we have built up a sufficient military capacity that it's hard to envision one. Given that, Bill Clinton, first President Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton began to bring down the military. One reason that Bill Clinton was able to balance the budget in 2000 is that he brought down military spending. He also raised taxes on the rich and did put some limits on domestic spending, some of which I didn't like. But a reduction in military spending was an important part of that. Now, what we hear from the defenders of the unlimited Pentagon spending is that this is a bad idea, and in fact, they say if we do this, we're going to hollow out the military. And Leon Panetta, or at least, well, the man who identifies Leon Panetta, having known Panetta when he was in the House, I suspected something happened in the CIA, and I haven't seen the DNA, but at any rate, the person known as Leon Panetta says we must not make any further cuts in the military. Remember, 5,000 less troops out of 100,000 in Asia, and it would sink morale. We got to hit every corner of the globe. He said we must not again make the mistake that we made of hollowing out the military. And he said we made that mistake after World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Cold War. This is Leon Panetta in October. We cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of past reductions in force that followed World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the fall of the Iron Curtain, which to varying degrees, as a result of across-the-board cuts, weakened our military. We must avoid a hollow military. Note that Mr. Panetta says that we hollowed out the military after the Cold War. A little history quiz. Who was the President of the United States after the Cold War? It was Bill Clinton. Who was Bill Clinton's budget director? Anybody? Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta, and then he went on to be the chief of staff. It is extraordinary, the mind games that are going on here. He has now announced, and by the way, when he was budget director and chief of staff, he boasted that they were able to, correctly, that they were able to balance the budget. He's now retroactively telling us that he balanced the budget by hollowing out the military. By the way, the argument that he hollowed out the military is nonsense. I was talking to Gordon Adams, who I'll be doing a repeat of this at the Council on Foreign Relations Monday, who was his deputy at the OMB for Defense. And I've asked them this question, you've hollowed out the military. Can anybody think of any instance in the last 20 years, I'd say 30 years, I certainly cannot, nobody I know can point to one, where America had an objective it wanted to accomplish with military force and we were too weak to do it? I can think of no case where we did not have the military force to do what we did. By the way, this hollowed out military was very successful in bombing Milosevic into submission, so we got some good results in Croatia. And then this hollowed out military, after all, George Bush becomes president. He didn't have that much time to, I don't know how you unhollow something, stuff it again. But he went into 2 wars. I mean, this notion that the military was hollowed out is nonsense. One of the leading Republicans, we had an angry debate, and he said, no, there you go again, you're trying to cut the military. And I remember in the 90s when we had hangar queens. And what were hangar queens? Well, they were these airplanes we had, these expensive airplanes that stayed in the hangar because we didn't have enough pilots to fly them. And he wouldn't yield to me, and I wanted to say, well, I have to say to my friend, yes, I understand these airplanes were in the hangars, but it wasn't because we had too few pilots. It was because we had too many airplanes. And nobody can show me where there was a need to bomb somebody that we weren't able to bomb. That was during the time when we had total air superiority in Yugoslavia. So the argument, what we have, I think, and why it succeeded is, well, the other argument is it's the terrorists. Yes, the communists are gone, we have the terrorists. Terrorists, vicious, evil people. I am in favor of the drones. I would like to see them killed. You know, Osama bin Laden, not only did he kill thousands of Americans, but because he's mad at America, with that anger at Israel on the side, he slaughters hundreds of innocent Africans in Kenya and Tanzania by blowing up our embassy. This man was a mad dog. Of course he had to be dealt with. But the terrorists are greatly flattered to compare them in destructive capacity to either Hitler or the Soviet Union. They don't have nuclear weapons, they don't have and delivery systems, they don't have tanks, they don't have planes. Yes, we need to fight them. Fighting the terrorists is a lot less expensive. It's harder in some ways. I wish you could defeat terrorism with nuclear submarines, because we have them, they don't, be over. But troops in Germany do nothing to fight terrorism. Thermonuclear weapons to destroy the Soviet Union do nothing to fight terrorism. So let me get back to one last argument, and then I'm going to throw this open, which is the most astounding at all. By the way, I found the quote from Buck McKeon. Defense has contributed more than half of the deficit reduction measures taken to date. Yes, from the part of the budget where defense is more than half the budget. Some, quote, want to use the military to pay for the rest. to protect the sacred cow that is entitlement spending. That's the position. And then Robert Samuelson, a former Crimson editor, who covered that McNamara story, by the way, has an article in the Washington Post supporting the military budget and objecting to quotes, and the headline is, "The Pentagon versus the welfare state." I mean, that's why I said, let me just say, and I'll get on to the last point and throw it open. We need to reduce the deficit. Not in the near term, we should be spending some more. By the way, in terms of what the government's done, and every month, I think in the last 15, private sector jobs have gone up and public sector jobs have gone down. So we've had a net increase, much smaller than we wanted, but it was offset, it would be a bigger. There are nearly 1 million fewer state and local employees today than there were when President Obama took office over our objections. The unemployment rate would be a couple of tenths of percent lower, and these people would be out there working. So we should not be doing that in the near term. But yes, we need a long-term deficit reduction. The point is very simple. If you exempt the military from deficit reduction, it is impossible to reduce the deficit and still have any serious effort to maintain the quality of life in America. The numbers just don't work. Think of anything we now do: environmental protection, rail transit, health care for the very poor, et cetera. All of those we would have to do less of, not more of. Education, community colleges, student assistance. They all go down because the military budget is so huge. It is larger than Medicare. And I believe it is one place where we can make substantial cuts and have no loss. But here's the final argument, which is really astounding. It is equivalent in, I think, inconsistency to Panetta now confessing that he hollowed out the military when he wasn't looking. It is that we cannot afford to cut the military because it will have a negative effect on jobs. The military, they say, creates jobs. Now, understand that this comes, you may have seen Paul Krugman's column about this a week ago. This argument comes on the whole from people who say government spending can't create jobs, that the stimulus didn't create jobs, that government highway spending doesn't create jobs, that hiring teachers and cops doesn't create jobs. I call it weaponized Keynesianism. The argument is that no government spending creates jobs unless it's for the military. As a matter of fact, if you're spending versus not spending, yes. If the question is, do you cut the military or not, that would have some near-term job reduction. But the issue is now, it's not whether you cut the military or not. Do you cut the military or do you cut something else? There have been articles in the Boston Globe about how bad this would be for Massachusetts. But if you don't cut the military and you cut medical care in Massachusetts, it will be much worse. We make a lot of money off medical care, including I was at one of the major hospitals in Boston earlier this week, and we were talking about what medical care does for Massachusetts, and they said, yeah, we have a patient now whose family is occupying, from the Middle East, the top floor of the Four Seasons, because that person is getting medical care in Boston. So I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars they'll be dropping here in those bills. We make medical instruments, we have NIH research, we have biotech. So even if you look at the job thing, we get hurt worse. In fact, military spending is one of the least efficient ways to do jobs. That's not a reason not to do it. You do military spending not as a big public works project, but to defend yourself. And well, we have allies that need help. South Korea, Taiwan, Israel, but not every target everywhere all over the globe. And again, the purpose is to protect them against bad things, not to go into chaos and be alchemists and turn it into gold. But there are two reasons why military spending is not so good for jobs compared to other things. I would say compared to other things, I would just be a little lesson. One of the things I have come more and more to rely on in my public sector work is a piece of wisdom imparted in a kind of allegorical way by one of the great philosophers of the 20th century. His name was Henny Youngman. And younger people can go look him up, but he was a very funny comedian. Back in the era, in the 50s and 60s, when mother-in-law jokes and wife jokes were the staple of humor. But he had one that was a kind of a wife joke, but it was really very funny. How's your wife? Compared to what? Really quite intelligent. His answer, how's your wife, is compared to what? Well, every question I ask, I gotta say, compared to what? So cutting military spending compared to cutting any other kind of spending will give you less jobs. First of all, except for the foreign aid budget, which is 5% of the military budget, 4%, more of the military budget is spent, obviously, overseas than anywhere else. Secondly, it tends to be very capital intensive. Oh, and there's a third point. When we build a bridge or do health research or do a lot of these other things, we are doing things that enhance the productive stream. When we build a nuclear weapon, we build it and hope to hell it's never used. I mean, it's not the military's fault. Much of what we do with the military, we build never to use it. So it does not have the kind of knock-on positive effects. So that's where we are. I believe, and again, it comes down to two arguments why we're doing this. One, because we're getting unduly frightened by terrorism. Not that they're not vicious people. They're not the threat to us, and you fight them in different ways. By the way, much of the anti-terrorism stuff isn't even in the military budget. It's in the Homeland Security budget. So I'm talking about cutting the military budget. That's got nothing to do with trying to do what we do at home. And the other is, how can you be a great nation if all you do is worry about how well you live and how good your kids feel and education? I mean, it's an assertion that worrying about the quality of your lives is unworthy of a great nation. There was a debate in the 19th century about that with the role of Great Britain, with people who were the anti-imperialists, and it was Great Britain versus Little England. Little England was a derogatory term for people who just wanted to live good lives. Well, I'm in the Little England, Little America thing, and that's where we are. So that's the issue. And it will be coming up, brief scenario. I don't think the 12-member committee is going to be able to come to an agreement. We had thought, or some, because I voted against the bill, but some Democrats thought, oh, well, they'll be so afraid of what the sequester will do to military spending that they'll maybe go for raising taxes, et cetera. No, I think what the Republicans plan to do is to, after the committee isn't able to come up with something, it's not that they don't want the committee to come up with something. If the committee would have cut Medicare, Social Security, et cetera, they'd be very happy with it. But they believe that next year they can amend the sequester to exempt the military. So I think sometime next year we're going to have this fight. Because if you exempt the military from these cuts, you do it in one of two ways. Either you reduce the amount of deficit reduction that you get, or you really cut Medicare badly. And of course, they would like to abolish Medicare, although I will close with this. I apologize to Congressman Ryan, my colleague, for saying that he had a plan to abolish Medicare. That's the one that says if you're under 55, you will not get Medicare when you hit the age of Medicare at 65. You know, if you're now under 55, when you reach 65, you won't get Medicare. You will get a voucher from the government, which you can use to pay for private insurance, which will almost certainly be much more than that. But it's unfair to say that they're abolishing Medicare, because if you are now 40 years old, when you become 65, you will not get Medicare, but you will until then pay the Medicare tax. It's really quite interesting. They leave in place the Medicare tax. So if you're under 55, they continue to tax you. By the way, if they didn't do that, they wouldn't save any money. If you remitted the tax on the program, there'd be no savings. So they charge you the full tax and don't give you the benefit. I would rather cut the military. With that, I'm ready to talk to people.
Thank you, Congressman. We have time for questions. As most of you know, there are microphones in 4 different locations. If you'd like to ask a question, line up in front of the microphones. And I just want to remind you that a good question at the Kennedy School has 3 elements. First, you identify yourself. Second, you keep the question short and with 1 element. And finally, it ends with a question mark. And with that, I would like to start right over here.
Hello, my name is Sarah, and I'm a freshman at the college. And I was wondering, certain American politicians expressed some opposition to President Obama's pledge to get all American troops out of Iraq by the end of the year. But given our enormous troop levels in areas like, say, Germany or South Korea, I'm wondering if you think there's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance about saying that it would be terrible if we pulled out all of those troops, but we're going to keep a tremendous number of troops in areas where there seems to be no justification for it.
Well, look, I think the president is mistaken in continuing beyond this. I give Bill Clinton credit because he resisted this notion to spend more and more on the military. By the way, so did Bush Sr. As to the criticism for pulling out of Iraq, I think it helps refute the argument for more military spending. First of all, understand this is George Bush's timetable. And the Obama administration, I believe, Panetta was trying to stay in. From the conversations I had, I give Vice President Biden the credit. He was the one who most insisted, and we had this semi-public debate in the Democratic caucus. But the argument is, no one is arguing that after we pull out of Iraq, it will be in any way a threat to America. You know, even Dick Cheney has given up on weapons of mass destruction. What they say is, we must protect the gains that we have made in bringing stability to Iraq. By the way, this is some stability over there. But the argument is that American troops are necessary to preserve the social peace. That doesn't work. You cannot, again, you can stop people from shooting each other. You can't make them love each other by American troops. But the justification for us staying in Iraq has nothing to do with American security. It is all about our civilizing mission to the Iraqis. Now, I think the president's right about this. I wish he would go further and realize this. I don't know if you saw this, but I have a new hero, a man named Peter Fuller. He's a general. And he just blew the whistle on the Afghans. He just got fired. He was the lieutenant general in charge of American training of Afghans, and he said, this is a disgrace, this is a disaster, they don't want to do anything, they don't like us, we're wasting our money here. So they fired him. Instead of saying, yeah, you're right, let's go home. So I agree that it is, I hope that the Iraq thing is the beginning.
Right up here.
Hi, I'm Lena Robinson of LPAC TV. In my view, the most important thing that's facing us right now is the threat of an escalation into general warfare, which would be triggered by an attack on Iran, if there were such a thing. And we have an escalation of the drumbeats, which should remind people of how we got into Iraq in the first place, which was based on lies. And now the same scenario is being played up around Iran. Now, an attack on Iran would immediately draw in Russia, China, United States, and nuclear weapons, possibly on American soil. So my question, I mean, we have a buildup. It's true, we have like probably 150,000 troops in the area.
The question?
My question is, when in the 1970s...
What TV were you with?
LPAC TV.
LPAC? What is that?
LaRouche PAC TV, LaRouchePAC.com.
Okay, thank you. I thought so.
Please hear me out. I have
All
a
right,
question.
Please get to your question, and I'll be glad to respond.
My question is, in the 70s, the
No,
Republican...
that's in the 70s.
How
not a
much
question.
more is it going to take before the Democratic Party realizes that they have to move to impeach and remove President Barack Obama?
Okay, thank you. First of all,
before we get a world war going.
Thank you. You have just heard from the Lyndon LaRouche lunatic fringe of America. And I am always pleased when the LaRouche people are here because I can demonstrate my deep commitment to the First Amendment, which is your right to say wacky things. First of all, I do not want to see an attack. I'm sorry, ma'am, you asked your question. It's now my turn. You're going to have to abide by the rules. The fact is that well, you called for the impeachment of Obama, and I'm sorry, I'll give you another minute, and then I'm going to talk. Is that okay?
My question is, how much more than a threat of general warfare is it going to take before the Democratic Party remove Obama, like the Republicans removed Nixon, when they realized that Obama is actually the one destroying the Democratic Party and civilization?
I want to respond now. First of all, I do not think it would be a good idea to bomb Iran, but I do not think there is the remotest chance that it would draw China and Russia into a war. That would not be happening. As a matter of fact, other people have bombed other people. So Russia and China are not going to go to war with the United States over Iran. I do worry about Iran having nuclear weapons, and I want to step up the sanctions. I think our ultimate defense there is the same kind of deterrent we used against a much more heavily armed Soviet Union, which is both Iran and North Korea should understand that they will be destroyed if they attack us. I'm sorry you think it's slander, but I think the notion that we should impeach Barack Obama because you don't like his Iranian policy is lunatic. And I'm sorry, ma'am, no, I don't think you get a third shot. And I've listened to what you had to say. These are the people who, the last time I had LaRouche people talking about Obama, they were comparing him to Hitler. Yeah, you just nodded. Okay. Thank you. Let me just say, yes, we should be trying very hard to keep Iran from getting nuclear weapons. I think the ultimate threat is the part of the problem with trying to bomb their facilities is at this point, those facilities are probably not easily bombable, et cetera. But no, there was no chance of a general war, and no, if you ask me how long is it going to take the Democrats to impeach Obama, I do not think we will ever, let me answer your question specifically, never.
Right here.
Hi, my name is Mark. I'm an MPP1 here at the Kennedy School. There's a wide variety of programs here at the Kennedy School to work on nonprofits, to work in local governments, and to some degree it sometimes feels to me that there's a feeling that the federal government is a place of great frustration. And today in your talk you talked about the various forces that have kind of been at war with each other and the things that they've said. What do you think we should think about as students about our role in the federal government in the future? Is it something
It depends on who controls it. I think for much of our history, serving in the federal government has been a very good way to do good things. But elections have consequences. The American people gave majorities, those who voted, in 2010 to people who do not believe that there is a constructive role for government. When the government is controlled by people who do not think it has a constructive role, there's not a lot you can do that would be constructive. A great deal depends on the outcome of the 2012 election. If you get a repeat of the last election, and those people who are now in power in the House and grew their power in the Senate are in charge, no, then the federal government would not be a great place to do a lot of useful things. But it's in the hands of the voters. And that's the answer. Right now, there are still things going on, and there are people in the federal government doing excellent work and very satisfying work. But if the Republicans win the presidency, the House, and the Senate, they have a very different conception. They do not see a positive role for the federal government. Interestingly, they underplay the role of what we can do domestically. Many of them will overdo it internationally. They have a very activist role about what you can do to fix a society overseas. But if they win the election, there will be a diminution of the opportunity to do useful things at the federal level. And by the way, at the state and local level as well, because if they control the federal government, funds to state and local government will dry up, and it will be, they will be reduced, and it will be harder to do constructive things there as well.
Right over here.
I'm Andrew Mack. I'm a student at the college, and I was wondering about a statement you made about reducing military spending by $200 billion. You said $100 million of it would come from a drawdown in Iraq and
120.
Afghanistan. 120. You said you also wanted to see $100 million more.
Right.
I'm wondering how long you think it would take to start saving the $120 million in Iraq and Afghanistan, and what specifically you would cut to get $100 billion.
Right, yes. I think you could probably get, if you started now, you could be out of Afghanistan by the end of next year. The plan now is to stay for 2014, so that would save a total of about $240. You can't just pull out. You have to phase it. But on the other hand, you phase it down, so you begin to get those savings. First of all, I would withdraw American ground troops from Western Europe. I would withdraw, and what happens is, it's not just withdrawing the troops, so it's somewhat cheaper to bring them home, but we do not need as many members of the military as we now have. It's not a one-for-one reduction. The military refers to it as end strength. I believe you could substantially reduce the end strength of the military. I would reduce the stockpile of nuclear weapons. The New York Times had a very good list of ways to save on October 30th. I would recommend it on how you could reduce the stockpile of nuclear weapons. You don't need to guard them, but you also don't need to produce more. I would pull the troops out of Okinawa. I would actually reduce one of the three legs of the triad, and I would cut back on the acquisition of strategic weapons. The other thing is I would have the Pentagon be more efficient. And there is an acknowledged inefficiency, but here's the problem. You cannot simply make people from the outside be more efficient. You cannot micromanage a complex organization. The only way to increase efficiency with any organization of that complexity, in my judgment, is to put some limit on what they spend. Once they limit, I guarantee you, if they knew that the money was tighter, they could be much tougher on the contractors, et cetera. So it would be a reduction in end strength, pulling back from much of the world, and I think you could reduce. Look, I think Libya was a good example of how we could get our NATO allies to do more, although they were sort of underprepared and we had to help them a little bit. but it's reducing the nuclear stockpile, getting rid of one of the 3 delivery systems, cutting back on the increase. I don't think we need as many nuclear submarines or as many aircraft carriers. Again, if you look at the dominance we have over the rest of the world, and reducing the end strength. That would be the major ways. I would not cut compensation to the military. Now, as to reducing the end strength, by the way, you're not firing anybody in the military. That would be outrageous after these people volunteered. But the average enlistment, I'm told, is about 6 years. So you can attrit down in the military fairly quickly. You know, in 2 years, 1/3 are up, and you don't have to replace them all.
Right over here.
Thank you. Robert Chu. I assume you know President Obama very well and his thinking, and how could you get him on board with your plans and thinking such that, and build a program to bring the budget deficit down and also have a program to win the election
Well,
next
I'm
year?
trying. I wish I would more look. I'm something. I understand the enormous weight on your shoulders when you are told every day in many languages that you were the leader of the free world. You know, I was told by a high-ranking Obama official when I said we should pull out of Iraq, no, the Iraqis want us to stay. Well, who the hell wouldn't want Americans to stay for nothing? Yeah, I mean, if some cop offered to sit in your backyard all night, well, for nothing, you'd say, hey, good, love to have you, pal. I mean, that's, so I don't know. I think that's still a fight for his soul. I am convinced he would not go along with altering the sequester. And it's by making arguments. I hope we are trying to persuade him. It's an area where I am a little disappointed in him because I think he has not done as much as he could there. There's been this historic tradition of Democratic presidents being afraid and candidates that they'll appear soft on national security. That's why our extremely able former governor wound up in a tank. Michael Dukakis is a first-rate guy, and he shouldn't have been in the tank. But I understand. They said, oh, you're a liberal. You got to show you're ready to shoot people. So he, who had been in the military and had a better military service, he was in the tank and he lost. I mean, that was that contributed to his defeat, sadly, and it was a great loss for the country. So we just got to keep banging away at it with regard to the president, and people need to speak out and support him. Now, one of the things that's going to help with him is the fact is that under Obama's leadership, Gaddafi, bin Laden, and al-Awlaki were all killed by Americans. Well, not by Americans. The Libyans killed, obviously, Gaddafi. I would hope he would feel insulated from the charge that he's too soft to be able to do that.
Right up here.
I'm sorry, are you looking up here? I can't see
Yes.
very well.
Yes, he is.
My name is Michael Brower. I got a master's and a PhD from Harvard. I studied at this school before Kennedy became president, and it was called the Littauer School. Congressman, I'd call you Barney if we went back 40 years, early years in politics. Question is, why don't you include in your speech the warning of President Dwight David Eisenhower in his farewell address to the American people? As you and I know, people in the audience probably don't, he was a 5-star general, general of the Army, commander-in-chief of all Allied forces in Europe fighting World War II, went on to be elected president, and in his farewell address to the American people, he warned us of the military-industrial complex. Why don't you quote him?
Well, two reasons. First of all, I get a little nervous because when I have someone I don't agree with all the time, I get a little nervous. But it's a valid point to make, but I would say this. In my analysis, I think the reason for the high level of spending is less the military-industrial complex, meaning the people who make money by selling weapons, and that was the influence, and more the kind of cultural lag in the view. There's some of it about weapons, but it's more the greatness of purpose, and even more, oh my God, America's threatened. It is this perception that there are crocodiles out there. There be dragons. So that's my analysis of it. But you're right. That is something that I should have mentioned as one of the things that Dwight Eisenhower did predict. And as a matter of fact, ironically, as Michael remembers from our ADA days, one of the issues that John Kennedy used against Richard Nixon was that the Eisenhower administration was soft on defense. It was the missile gap. John Kennedy accused the Eisenhower administration of allowing a missile gap to appear between the US and the Soviet Union, in which we were on the short end. Now that got some currency because, think about it, the Soviets were the first into space. The Soviets got into space in '58 before we did. So it was plausible that they had this thing. So it is in fact the case that they used that against Eisenhower, and you're right.
Right up here.
Hi, my name is Salman Hussein. I'm at the Kennedy School. I'm curious, Congressman, listening to you talking about basically limiting military spending. I wanted to hear your take, essentially, on whether you think that President Obama should take a harder stance regarding Israel and President Netanyahu, essentially, who's basically continuing settlement building, even though earlier in his administration, the Obama administration was really against it. I wanted to know if you think that either A, Obama should take a harder stance against Netanyahu in this case, or B, also cut back or entirely end funding to Israel regarding military expenditures.
Well, first of all, I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable question, but it has nothing to do with cutting military spending. It's totally unrelated. That's fine. But you said given that
Well, I mean, because a lot of the foreign aid that America gives around the world, vast majority of it goes to Israel, and vast majority of that
well,
aid
no,
is
the majority
military,
does not go to
military
Israel.
related.
The majority, Israel gets more than any other country, but it's not a majority of what we give.
Right.
And by the way, we have another recipient that is closing in on Israel, to my dismay, which is Pakistan, which why we pay them to hate us is a separate sort of psychological question. But it is true that the two largest recipients of American foreign aid are both Israel and Egypt. Egypt not quite as much. And one reason is, and I support this no matter what else you think, that was a promise America made over at Camp David. And President Carter said at the time, if you guys make peace, I will basically, I'll pay you forever. And I think with all of the ups and downs, that Israeli-Egyptian peace is one of the few bright things we've seen. And I notice that it does appear to be surviving the Egyptian overthrow of Mubarak. There was a fear that it wouldn't. As to the settlements, yes, I think we should make clear our opposition to the settlements. I am opposed to them. But I would not, I oppose the policies of a lot of countries. I think India is continuing to violate the UN mandate in Kashmir. I think India treats the Kashmiris who don't want to be part of India badly, and we should put pressure on them. But I don't want to cut off relations with India. I think the fundamental dispute between, I noticed that President Abbas just said that he acknowledges that the Arabs made a mistake when they opposed partition in 1948 and tried instead to wipe out Israel. A lot of this happened since then. Yes, I think that, but if I was an Israeli, I'd be even more strongly opposed to those settlements, particularly out there in the West Bank, where there is a military drain on Israel and a financial drain. So yes, I think we should push against the settlements, but I would not allow that to be, that would not lead me to cut off the aid, and I do believe that more of the problem has been on the Arab side, both under Ehud Barak and under Ehud Olmert. I believe Israel offered, with American support, deals to the Palestinians that were very good deals that would have ended the settlements and in fact led to the expulsion of some of the settlers, and they rejected them. And I think, yes, there were problems with Israel and the settlers, in part because of Israel's political situation, but there is still, I think, given the role of Hamas and in Gaza, a real problem with there not yet being a willingness to accept Israel's existence. And I include with that even Fatah, because they have said, well, they will not accept Israel as a Jewish democratic state, apparently because there is, in the part of some of the Arabs, an objection to there being a theocratic state, which apparently does not exist, does not extend to Saudi Arabia.
Right here.
Chukwuswagu, Mason Fellow, mid-career MPA, class of 2012. A couple of days back, the International Atomic Energy Agency announced that a nuclear Iran is fast approaching. Israel also announced that if the US doesn't take action, that they will strike Iran. Given that you just talked about cutting defense spending and given the volatile nature of this issue, I was wondering if we were advising President Obama today, what action would you advise him to take on this issue?
Well, the frustration here is and it really goes to the irresponsibility, both with Iran and North Korea, of China and Russia. Part of the reason we have not been more effective in trying to restrain the nuclearization in both countries, which are both trying to get nuclear weapons, is that neither China nor Russia will fully support that. I do not understand that. I must tell you, if I were Russia, I would be more worried about the Iranians having nuclear weapons than I am. They can wind up with the Chechen irredentist or others. And similarly, if I was China, I would worry about that nutcase in North Korea having a water gun, much less a nuclear weapon, right on my own border. So that's a frustration. We should continue to do what we can with sanctions, but I believe in both cases the ultimate sanction, and I assume this is being delivered. My understanding is if nuclear weapons go off, you can probably identify where they came from, et cetera. I think both the North Koreans and the Iranians, I hope, are being told, God help you if one of your nuclear weapons goes off somewhere, and you will pay a very, very high price for it. I don't think anything short of that works. I mean, particularly in the case of Iran, trying to take out the nuclear weapons, at this point they're dispersed, they're hidden. By the way, we did obviously try to screw them up with, Stuxnet or whatever, and that was, America's computer virus. But that's what I would do, is to try and do as much as we can economically. I think at the same time, look, you have to tell both North Korea and Iran that if they abandon nuclear weapons, there's some benefits. It cannot be all threats. They have to be credible promises, because that would be a real benefit to us and to the world. But the ultimate lever there, I think, is the threat of very serious destruction if they do this, which would be something I would hate to do, but I think you have to make that threat.
I'm going to come back to you for the last question in just a moment, but I want to take the prerogative to ask one of my own, which is just, you mentioned that weapons projects, once they exist, never get taken away and so forth. But one of the big reasons for that, many people claim, is the Congress, that members in their districts are trying to protect it and so forth. The military, even the Defense Department says if they didn't have to worry about the requirements of the Congress, they could cut a lot of spending that they think is unnecessary. So how would you solve that problem so that we use the money that we do spend?
No, there's no question. By making it clear, and that's why I have not been more successful in the past. Although we have killed some, the MX missile. We did manage to get a majority to kill the second engine for the F-35. But the only way it can be done is compared to what? There is very little chance of defeating a weapons system in general. That's why Mike Brower's invocation of the Eisenhower warning is relevant. But we will not be voting on whether or not to kill a weapons system. We will be voting on whether or not to kill a weapons system or make you wait 2 more years to get on Medicare or cut Medicaid. That is, it's the zero-sum game, and that's why I'm working very hard to frame it that way. And I believe if Congress has to vote next year on amending the sequester and exempting the military so that a greater burden falls on Medicare, that we will win. So that's the way to do it. Something's going to go. I mean, can I persuade people that they should chop off a finger? No. But if I said, all right, look, if you don't chop off your finger, we're chopping off your arm, I think the finger will win.
Last question.
Hi, Congressman. My name's Joe, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School and also one of your former constituents. And I'm just curious, it came out today that China may have been sneaking counterfeit equipment into our military arsenal. And also a few weeks ago, the Obama administration said that China and Russia have been conducting massive espionage operations against U.S. industry. And last year, a group of Russian spies, one of whom went to the Kennedy School, was rounded up by the FBI. And I'm curious, in light of this, do you still not see China and Russia as strategic threats?
First of all, you said they were slipping weapons to whom?
It just came out today. I saw it on CNN. I don't know how.
To whom? You said they were slipping?
China had been sneaking technology into the U.S. Military arsenal somehow.
Slipping bad technology?
Yeah, like counterfeit computer chips and stuff.
Yeah, no, do I think that Russia and China would like to do bad things? Sure. But that doesn't mean you need a thermonuclear arsenal. I didn't say they weren't a threat. I do not think either one of them is a threat of the magnitude of what the Soviet Union was. And I want to maintain a superiority over them. By the way, as to espionage, that they're spying on us, guess who spies on them? Countries spy on each other. What do you think the CIA is, a tourism bureau? I mean, these things happen. I do not have a high regard for either the Soviet Union, for Russia or China, and we need to be on guard. The point is that at $450 billion a year, our military would not just be superior to Russia and China, but it would be increasing by more than they are increasing every year. That superiority would grow every year. So it's not a case of thinking that they don't have to worry about them. I want to leave the 7th Fleet in there, and I think Taiwan is a great democratic success, and I would say no to China. If you invade Taiwan, we will be there. But there's no reason to have Marines on Okinawa. It's one thing to say we will be there in Taiwan. So it's not a case of either or. It's a case of being sensible, and I think we could be a lot more sensible. Thank you.
Congressman Frank, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe evening.